Okay, and welcome to the second tutorial on circles. The second tutorial is going to cover our second objective, which is to convert the equation of a circle from general form to standard form. So we'll flip to this page of our notes. And actually, before we go from general form to standard form, I'd actually like to go backwards and go from standard form into general form. Here's a circle that's already in standard form. It's pretty easy to find the center and the radius and be able to graph it. If we wanted to go to general form, remember general form has all of our terms separated and all equal to 0. So the first thing we're going to need to do is get rid of these parentheses here. So maybe you want to write the x minus 3 quantity side by side, because that's what squaring means. And then you can see that we'll be foiling. First terms give you x squared. Inner and outer terms give you negative 3x and another negative 3x, which combine to give negative 6x. And the last terms give a plus 9. If you need to write the binomial side by side so that you can see the FOIL, that's absolutely fine. But when you start to do this over and over and over again, you'll start to see a pattern here. And I'd love for you to see that pattern and be able to go straight to it. Y minus 2 quantity squared is going to become y squared. The negative 2 basically doubles to negative 4y, and then you square the negative 2 to make positive 4. And that's all equal to 16. Again, if you need to put the binomial side by side, absolutely fine, as long as you get to the correct trinomial every single time. So we've got all of these terms. We want to combine our like terms together, and we want to put the terms in the specific order for general form. So the quadratic x squared comes first, and then the quadratic y squared comes next, and then the linear x term, and then the linear y term. I've already combined the 9 and the 4 in my head to make 13. And now that is all equal to 16. Our final step for general form is to get this equal to 0. So I'm just going to take away the 16 from its like term on the other side. And I'm going to have my final answer for general form x squared plus y squared minus 6x minus 4y minus 3 equal to 0. So this is our general form. We know that this is still a circle because I already told you on the previous tutorial, the leading coefficient of our quadratic terms are both the same. They're both 1s in this case. So when the quadratic terms have the same coefficients, we will have a circle. Unfortunately, when it's in general form, this circle, it might be tough to find what the center is. It might be tough to find what the radius is, and therefore it might be tough to graph. So general form is important, but it's not very helpful if we're going to eventually graph the circle. So we want to learn how do we get from this purple general form and go backwards to put it into standard form so that we can find the pieces of the circle and be able to graph it. So we're going to use a method called completing the square. You did this back in Algebra 2. Completing the square, let's go ahead and look at this first example. I know that this is a circle. We all know that because the leading coefficients of my quadratic terms are the same. They're both 1s again. What I'm going to do to complete the square is I'm going to put my two x terms together first. I'm going to go ahead and put x squared and negative 8x together, and I'm going to put a little space. I put a little blank there to complete the square. I'll come back and do that. I'm going to put the y terms together as well. So I'll put my y squared and my 2y together. I'm also going to put a little plus blank here. At the same time that I'm grouping my variables together, I'm going to get rid of this number. So I'm going to just add it to the other side. So that's going to be equal to 8. And whatever I do to one side of an equation, I need to do to the other side of the equation. So since there's a red blank and a blue blank on the left side, I need to put the same blanks on the right side. Okay, now it's completing the square part. We can put, and honestly, we can put whatever number we want here. As long as we add it to both sides, we still have a true equation. But there's only one number that will help us, and it's the number that will make this whole trinomial a complete square, a perfect square trinomial. And how you find that number is you take this middle number, this middle coefficient, and you cut it in half. So that would be negative 4. And then when you take that half and square it, it goes up into the blank. So if I take this negative 8, cut it in half, I get negative 4. When I square it, I get positive 16. 16 is the number that would make this a perfect square trinomial. Same thing over here. I take half of this number, Half of 2 is 1, and then I square it to go up and complete the square. 1 squared is 1. If I put a 16 on one side of my equation, I better put 16 on the other side. And if I put 1 also, I better put another 1. So the genius of this is now these three terms represent a perfect square trinomial, and a perfect square trinomial factors into the same exact factor squared, meaning that it factors into the same two factors. So I can write them side by side, or I can write them as a quantity squared. How this trinomial will factor, the first term of my binomial is x, and that comes from the square root of this. The second term of my binomial either comes from the square root of 16 or the half of the negative 8. Either way, we put negative 4. Keeps the same sign as right here. So x minus 4 quantity squared. Do not forget about the plus sign here. And then we can go and factor this perfect square trinomial. Again, it factors into a quantity squared. In this case, that quantity is going to be a y, a plus sign, and either the square root of 1 or half of 2 makes my 1. On the other side of the equation, add these numbers together and we get 25, which feels pretty good because that is a perfect square. We're not always going to get a perfect square, but in this case we do. We just converted this general form of a circle into our standard form. And now it's real easy to find the center. The center of this one would be 4, negative 1, and the radius would equal the square root of 25, which is 5. And we could go and graph it. So that's one example. Let's look at another one. Same idea, we want to put the x terms together, the same variables together, so I'll put the x squared and the negative 4x. I'm going to leave a place for a plus blank. I'm going to put the terms that have the y together, and in this case there's actually just that one, so just y squared, positive y squared. There's nothing else over here, so it's already a perfect square because it's something squared, and that is equal to 13. Now if I put that brown blank on one side, I better put it on the other side. Now we have to think about what's going to complete the square. Okay, well, half of negative 4 is negative 2, and negative 2 squared is positive 4. In this case, because we're squaring, we're always adding a blank. If I put a 4 on this side, I better put a 4 on the other side. And now we'll go ahead and factor the x quantity. This perfect square trinomial factors into x minus 2 quantity squared. The y squared, again, it's already a perfect square, so I'll just leave it like that. And over here I get 17, which doesn't feel as good, but that's okay. We're not always going to get a perfect square. That is our standard form for this circle, and we can find our center. Our center, the h is 2, and our k, since there's a 0 over here and no quantity, k must be 0. And in this case, the radius is, if I want to use an equal sign, it is exactly equal to the square root of 17. But if I want to approximate what the square root of 17 is, I know that that's a little bit more than 4, and if I use my calculator to estimate it, it's about 4.123. So if I'm going to be graphing this, I'd go just a little bit more than 4 for my radius. It's just a sketch. So those are two into standard form from general form. I've got a try problem for you to try it yourself. If you would please push pause on your tutorial at this point and try to put this general form into standard form. Push pause now. Thank you. So this is the final answer that I got. Here's your standard form, x plus 3 quantity squared plus y minus 5 quantity squared equals to 36. And if you picked off the important information, the center is negative 3, 5, and the radius is 6. Thanks for watching this tutorial.